Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and looked out at the stars. The ship was called New Horizon, and it had been flying through space for 3 months now. But these 3 months were different from any other time in human history. For 3 months now, every human in the galaxy had been completely silent. No radio calls went out from Earth. No messages traveled between the colonies on Mars and Jupiter. No distress signals came from the mining ships near the asteroid belt. Every human settlement, every space station, and every exploration vessel had gone completely quiet. It was like humanity had simply vanished from the galaxy. Jake remembered the day the order came from Earth Command. He had been sitting in his captain's chair when the communication officer, Lisa Martinez, turned around with a worried look on her face. She held a decoded message in her hands and her voice shook when she spoke. The message was simple but terrifying. Earth Command had learned that an alien race called the Zephyrians was coming. These aliens had already destroyed 17 different species in the past 100 years. They were powerful and they were cruel, and they found their targets by listening to radio signals and communications. The Zephyrians would track a species by following their radio waves and electronic signals. Once they found a planet or a colony, they would study the communications to learn about the species. They would find out how many ships they had and where their weapons were stored and how scared the people were. Then they would attack when the species was most afraid and least prepared. But Earth Command had a plan. If humanity went completely silent, the Zephyrians would not be able to track them. Without radio signals to follow, the aliens would have to search the entire galaxy to find human settlements. This would take years, and it would give humanity time to prepare. So on March 15th, at exactly 12 noon, Earth time, every human facility shut down their communications. Space stations stopped their daily reports. Colony ships ended their regular check-ins with Earth. Even emergency beacons were turned off. The entire human race went dark. Jake looked around his bridge and saw his crew working quietly at their stations. They communicated only with hand signals and written notes. The silence felt strange and heavy. Humans were naturally social creatures who loved to talk and share information, but now they had to learn to be quiet. Lisa Martinez was the ship's science officer, and she spent her days monitoring alien communications networks. She had special equipment that could pick up radio signals from other species without sending any signals back. For weeks she had been listening to Zephyrian transmissions, and what she heard made her both worried and hopeful. The Zephyrians were confused. Their military commanders kept talking about the quiet species and the vanished voices. They had been tracking human radio signals for months and planning their attack. But suddenly all the signals had stopped. The aliens did not know what to make of this. Jake walked over to Lisa's station and she showed him her notes. The Zephyrians were having heated discussions about what had happened to humanity. Some thought the humans had all died from a plague or natural disaster. Others believed they had discovered the Zephyrian plans and were hiding. A few even suggested that humans had somehow left the galaxy entirely. But what worried the Zephyrian commanders most was that they had never encountered a species that could coordinate such complete silence. Every other race they had conquered had panicked when they learned about the coming invasion. They had filled the airwaves with desperate calls for help and frantic military communications. But humans had simply disappeared from the electromagnetic spectrum. The New Horizon continued its patrol through the Outer Rim territories. Jake's mission was to check on human mining operations and research stations in this sector. But he had to do it without using any electronic communication. Instead, his crew used an old system of light signals. They would flash coded messages using the ship's external lights. When they reached the mining station on asteroid designation Alpha 7, they found it apparently abandoned. But Jake knew better. The miners had received the same orders as everyone else. They had shut down their equipment and hidden their operations. The station looked dead from the outside, but Jake knew that inside the asteroid tunnels the miners were still working. A series of light flashes came from the asteroid. The message was simple. "Welcome New Horizon, all well here, continuing operations." Jake smiled. The silence plan was working. As they continued their journey, Jake thought about what humanity was really doing. They were not just hiding from the Zephyrians. They were buying time. While the aliens searched the galaxy for silent human settlements, every human colony and ship was preparing for war. New weapons were being built in secret. Military training was happening in underground facilities. Scientists were developing new technologies that could fight the Zephyrian fleet. But all of this preparation was happening in complete silence. The hardest part for Jake was not being able to contact his family on Earth. His wife Carol and his 2 children lived in New Chicago. He had not spoken to them in 3 months, and he would not be able to speak to them until the silence was broken. But he knew they were safe, and he knew they understood why this sacrifice was necessary. Lisa brought him another report about Zephyrian communications. The aliens were getting more frustrated every day. Their scouts were being sent out to search for human settlements, but they were finding nothing. The Zephyrians had expected to find panicked humans broadcasting desperate messages. Instead, they found empty space and silent worlds. What the Zephyrians did not understand was that humans had learned something important about warfare. Sometimes the best weapon is not the biggest gun or the fastest ship. Sometimes the best weapon is patience and planning, and the ability to work together without making a sound. Jake looked out at the stars again. Somewhere out there, the Zephyrian fleet was searching for humanity. They were powerful, and they had advanced technology, and they had destroyed many civilizations. But they had never fought an enemy that could disappear completely. They had never faced a species that could coordinate absolute silence across an entire galaxy. The silence was not a sign of weakness. It was not surrender. It was preparation. And when humanity finally broke that silence, it would not be with words. It would be with actions that would shake the very foundations of the Zephyrian Empire. But for now, Jake and his crew and every other human in the galaxy would remain quiet. They would wait, and they would prepare, and they would trust in the plan. The day would come when humanity would speak again. And when that day arrived, the galaxy would learn what humans could accomplish when they worked together in perfect, silent coordination. Commander Vexithul walked back and forth on the command deck of his massive warship. The ship was called Void Render, and it was the largest vessel in the Zephyrian Imperial fleet. For weeks now, he had been trying to understand what had happened to the humans, and the silence was driving him crazy. The Zephyrians were a proud warrior race that had conquered the galaxy through fear and superior technology. They had 6 arms, each ending in sharp claws, and their skin was covered in thick scales that could stop most weapons. Their eyes glowed red in the dark, and their voices could shatter glass when they were angry. But what made them truly dangerous was their ability to break the spirit of their enemies before the fighting even began. Vexthul had destroyed 17 civilizations using the same method every time. First, his scouts would detect radio signals from a new species. Then his communication specialists would study these signals for months or even years. They would learn the language and understand the culture, and map out every settlement and military installation. The Zephyrians were experts at psychological warfare. They would broadcast terrifying messages to their targets. They would describe in detail how they had destroyed other species. They would send images of burning cities and broken fleets. By the time the Zephyrian fleet arrived, most species were already paralyzed with fear. But the humans had done something no other species had ever done. They had simply stopped talking. Vexthul turned to his communications officer. The officer was a young Zephyrian named Korthwell, who had been monitoring human transmissions for 6 months before they went silent. "Tell me again what you detected before the silence began," Vexthul demanded. Korthwell checked his records. "Commander, the humans had normal communication patterns for a spacefaring civilization. We detected signals from their homeworld and 12 colony systems. They had regular military transmissions, commercial shipping communications, and personal messages between families. Everything was normal until March 15th, when all signals stopped at exactly the same time." "The same time," Vexthul repeated. "How is that possible?" "Unknown, sir. Our analysts believe it would require coordination across thousands of light years. No species we have encountered has ever achieved such precise timing for a galaxy-wide communication shutdown." This troubled Vexthul more than he wanted to admit. The Zephyrians had always succeeded because they understood their enemies. They would listen to panic in the radio transmissions. They would hear the fear in emergency broadcasts. They would detect the confusion as civilizations tried to coordinate their defenses. But humans had given them nothing to analyze. On the bridge of another Zephyrian ship, Captain Nexithar was having similar problems. His vessel was called the Star Crusher, and it was leading a scouting mission into what had been human territory. For 3 weeks they had been searching for any sign of human activity. The first system they investigated was called Kepler by the humans. Intelligence reports indicated it had been a major mining operation with over 10,000 human workers. But when the Star Crusher arrived, they found only empty space stations and silent mining equipment. Captain Nexthar ordered his sensors officer to conduct a detailed scan. The equipment showed that the mining stations had been recently abandoned. There were still traces of human activity, but no life signs and no active technology. "This makes no sense," Nexthar said to his second-in-command. "Where could 10,000 humans disappear to so quickly?" His second-in-command was an experienced warrior named Gexthor, who had participated in the conquest of 8 different species. "Sir, in all our previous campaigns we have seen 3 types of behavior. Some species fight to the death. Others surrender immediately. A few try to negotiate, but no species has ever just vanished." Meanwhile, on the human mining station deep inside asteroid Kepler 7, foreman Rick Johnson was watching the Zephyrian ship through concealed sensors. The humans had not vanished at all. They had simply learned to hide better than any species in galactic history. When the silence order came, Rick and his workers had moved their entire operation underground. They had sealed the surface installations to look abandoned while continuing their work in hidden tunnels deep inside the asteroid. The Zephyrians could scan the surface all they wanted, but they would never detect the bustling activity happening kilometers below. Rick received a coded light signal from another human ship in the system. The message was brief but important. "Zephyrian scouts detected. Phase 2 authorized. Prepare defensive positions." Phase 2 was part of humanity's larger plan. While maintaining complete radio silence, human settlements were also preparing elaborate traps for any Zephyrian forces that came looking for them. The aliens expected to find frightened civilians or abandoned colonies. Instead, they would find carefully planned ambushes. Back on the Void, Render Commander Vexithul was becoming increasingly agitated. His superiors in the Zephyrian High Command were demanding answers. They wanted to know why the human conquest was taking so long. Previous campaigns had been completed within months of first contact. The problem was that there had been no first contact with humans in the traditional sense. Usually, the Zephyrians would announce their presence with overwhelming displays of force. They would destroy a few small settlements to prove their power. Then they would broadcast surrender demands and watch as panic spread through enemy communications networks. But you cannot intimidate an enemy that refuses to listen. You cannot break the spirit of a species that will not respond to your threats. The humans had found the one weakness in Zephyrian psychology. They had discovered that a predator becomes confused when its prey simply disappears. Vexithul called together his senior officers for an emergency meeting. The command room filled with the largest and most experienced Zephyrian warriors in the fleet. These were soldiers who had conquered planets and destroyed entire civilizations. "We are facing an unprecedented situation," Vexthul began. "The humans have achieved something we believed was impossible. They have coordinated absolute silence across their entire civilization. This suggests a level of discipline and organization that we have never encountered." One of his officers, a veteran named Rexthor, raised a concern. "Commander, what if this silence is not about hiding from us? What if the humans are using this time to prepare for war?" The room fell quiet. This was a possibility that none of them wanted to consider. Every previous species had been so terrified by Zephyrian reputation that they spent most of their time panicking instead of preparing. But a species calm enough to maintain galactic silence might also be calm enough to plan effective resistance. Vexthul made a decision that would change everything. "Send out more scout ships, search every system where we detected human activity, find these humans and learn what they are planning. But be careful. A species that can disappear this completely might have other surprises waiting for us." As the Zephyrian scouts prepared to depart, none of them realized they were about to discover just how dangerous a silent enemy could be. Lieutenant Commander Helen Brooks crouched in the underground bunker on Mars and watched the Zephyrian landing ships approach the surface. From her hidden position, she could see 3 alien vessels descending toward what appeared to be an abandoned human colony. The Zephyrians had no idea that they were walking into the most carefully planned trap in human military history. The Mars colony had been home to 50,000 people before the silence began. When Earth Command gave the order to go dark, the entire population had moved into underground facilities that had been secretly constructed over the past 5 years. The surface buildings were left intact but empty, to create the illusion of a recently abandoned settlement. Helen activated her silent communication system. It used quantum entanglement technology that the Zephyrians could not detect or intercept. Her message went instantly to defense stations hidden throughout the colony. Targets approaching. All units prepare for engagement. Maintain silence protocol until my signal. The Zephyrian landing party consisted of 30 heavily armed warriors led by a captain named Dexmore. Intelligence reports indicated that Dexmore had personally led the final assault on 6 different conquered worlds. He was experienced in finding and destroying the last remnants of defeated civilizations. Dexmore and his warriors emerged from their ships, expecting to find cowering human survivors hiding in the abandoned buildings. This was how it always worked. Some members of conquered species would try to hide in their ruined cities, hoping the Zephyrians would overlook them. These survivors were usually terrified and defenseless and provided useful information about any remaining military assets. But as the Zephyrians spread out through the empty streets, they found something strange. The buildings showed no signs of damage or hasty evacuation. Personal belongings were still in place. Vehicles were parked normally. Food was still fresh in storage areas. It looked like the entire population had simply vanished moments before their arrival. What Dexmore did not know was that every building he was examining contained hidden weapon systems. The humans had spent months installing automated defense platforms that looked like ordinary furniture or structural elements. When activated, these systems could eliminate an entire invasion force without exposing a single human defender. Helen watched as the Zephyrian patrol moved deeper into the colony center. She waited until they were positioned exactly where her tactical plans required them to be. The aliens were standing in a plaza surrounded by buildings that contained the most powerful defensive systems in the colony. She sent the activation signal. The effect was immediate and devastating. What the Zephyrians thought were decorative pillars suddenly opened to reveal plasma cannons. Windows that looked normal became firing ports for energy weapons. Even the ground beneath their feet contained hidden missile launchers. The Zephyrian warriors had fought many battles, but they had never faced an enemy that could turn an entire city into a weapon. Within minutes, the entire landing party was eliminated without a single shot being fired by a human soldier. The automated systems had done all the work. Similar scenes were playing out across human space. On the mining station at Asteroid Alpha 7, Foreman Rick Johnson watched as Zephyrian scouts approached what they believed was an abandoned facility. The aliens had detected traces of recent human activity and thought they might find valuable intelligence about human military capabilities. Instead, they found a mining station that had been converted into a massive trap. Every tunnel and corridor contained hidden weapons. The mining equipment itself had been modified to serve as defensive systems. When the Zephyrians entered the station, they triggered sensors that sealed all exits and activated lethal security measures. Rick felt no satisfaction in watching the aliens die. But he understood that this was necessary for human survival. The Zephyrians had destroyed 17 civilizations, and they would destroy humanity too if they were not stopped. The silence had given humans time to prepare these defenses, and every successful trap bought more time for the larger plan on the research station orbiting Jupiter. Dr. Amy Carter was coordinating similar operations throughout the solar system. As the head of defensive planning for the outer colonies, she had spent years designing the trap systems that were now proving so effective against Zephyrian scouts. The key to success was making everything look abandoned while maintaining deadly functionality. Human settlements appeared to be ghost towns, but they were actually automated fortresses. The Zephyrians expected to find frightened survivors or useful technology. Instead, they found death waiting in every shadow. But Amy knew that these tactical victories were just the beginning. The real test would come when the main Zephyrian fleet realized what was happening and changed their approach. The automated defenses were effective against small scouting parties, but they would not be enough to stop a full-scale invasion. Back on the Void Render Commander, Vex Thule was receiving increasingly disturbing reports from his scout ships. 3 separate landing parties had simply vanished after making contact with apparently abandoned human settlements. Their ships remained in orbit, but all communication had ceased. This was unprecedented in Zephyrian military history. Their scouts were experienced warriors equipped with advanced technology. They should have been able to handle any survivors hiding in abandoned colonies. The fact that they were disappearing suggested that the human settlements were not as abandoned as they appeared. Vex Thule called his senior staff together for an emergency briefing. The tactical situation was becoming more complex than anyone had anticipated. Intelligence Officer Corthwell presented his analysis of the missing scout ships. Commander, the evidence suggests that human settlements contain active defensive systems despite appearing abandoned. Our scouts are walking into carefully prepared ambushes. The humans have somehow converted their colonies into automated weapons platforms. This revelation changed everything. If humans could coordinate galaxy-wide silence, they could also coordinate galaxy-wide defensive preparations. The Zephyrians were not dealing with a panicked civilization trying to hide. They were dealing with a military force that had used the silence to prepare for war. Captain Nexthar of the Star Crusher reported additional troubling intelligence. Sir, our deep space sensors are detecting unusual energy signatures from multiple human systems. The readings suggest massive industrial activity, despite the lack of communication signals. The humans appear to be manufacturing something on an enormous scale. Vexthul realized that the Zephyrian Empire had made a critical mistake. They had assumed that silence meant weakness and fear, but human silence meant patience and preparation. While the Zephyrians had been searching for their prey, the prey had been preparing to become predators. The hunt was about to become much more dangerous than anyone in the Zephyrian fleet had imagined. Admiral Kevin Walsh stood in the massive underground command center, buried deep beneath the surface of Luna. The facility had been constructed in secret over the past 10 years, and was now the nerve center for the largest military operation in human history. Around him, hundreds of officers worked at control stations, managing fleets and armies spread across 47 star systems. The walls of the command center displayed a three-dimensional map of human space showing the positions of every ship colony and defensive installation. Red dots marked Zephyrian forces, while blue dots represented human assets. What the display revealed would have shocked the Zephyrian commanders. Humanity had not been hiding in fear. They had been preparing for total war. Kevin had been planning this moment since the first intelligence reports about the Zephyrian Empire reached Earth 5 years ago. While diplomats had tried to make peaceful contact with other alien species, the military had quietly prepared for the possibility that humanity would face an enemy that could not be reasoned with. The silence protocol had been the key to everything. By going completely dark, humanity had bought 4 months of preparation time. But more importantly, they had convinced the Zephyrians that humans were a weak species trying to hide from superior forces. This misconception would prove to be the aliens' greatest mistake. Dr. Amy Carter walked over to Kevin's command station carrying a quantum communication device. As the architect of humanity's new instantaneous communication network, she had spent years developing technology that could coordinate military operations across vast distances without using detectable radio signals. Admiral, she said, the quantum network is fully operational across all 47 systems. Every human commander is standing by for the execute order. Kevin looked at the strategic display one more time. Human forces were positioned exactly where they needed to be. The Zephyrian fleet was spread out across multiple systems, searching for human settlements that appeared abandoned, but were actually heavily fortified. The alien commanders had no idea they were about to face an enemy that had turned military preparation into an art form. Operation Thunderstrike was the culmination of everything humanity had learned about warfare strategy and coordination. While the Zephyrians had relied on fear and brute force to conquer other species, humans had developed something far more dangerous. They had learned to fight as a single unified organism spanning dozens of star systems. On the exploration ship New Horizon, Captain Jake Morrison received the quantum signal he had been waiting for. The message was simple but carried the weight of human civilization. All units prepare for synchronized engagement. Operation Thunderstrike commences in 60 seconds. Jake looked around his bridge at the crew members who had maintained perfect silence for 4 months. They had followed orders without question, even when it meant losing contact with their families and friends. Now they would finally be able to speak again, but their first words would be declarations of war. In the asteroid belt, mining foreman Rick Johnson received the same signal at exactly the same time. His workers had spent months converting mining equipment into weapons platforms and transforming asteroid tunnels into military bases. What the Zephyrians thought was an abandoned mining operation was actually a fortress capable of destroying entire fleets on Mars. Lieutenant Commander Helen Brooks prepared her automated defense systems for coordinated action with human forces throughout the solar system. The trap that had eliminated Zephyrian scouts was just a small demonstration of what human engineering could accomplish. Now every human settlement would reveal its true nature as a military stronghold. Across the galaxy, similar preparations were reaching completion. On Europa Orbital Station, Commander Alex Turner activated weapon systems that had been disguised as scientific research equipment. On Titan Colony, Director Nancy Foster brought online defensive platforms that had been hidden beneath agricultural domes. Every human outpost had become a fortress, and every fortress was ready to fight. Kevin Walsh initiated the final countdown sequence. When he spoke, his voice was transmitted simultaneously to every human commander in the galaxy through the quantum network. This is Admiral Walsh speaking to all human forces. For 4 months we have maintained silence while preparing for this moment. Today we show the galaxy what humanity can accomplish when we work together. All units execute Operation Thunderstrike. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Across 47 star systems, human forces emerged from concealment like a sleeping giant, awakening from hibernation. Ships that had been hiding in asteroid fields suddenly appeared on Zephyrian sensors. Planets that seemed dead suddenly bristled with defensive installations. Space stations that looked abandoned revealed massive weapon arrays. On the Zephyrian flagship, Void Render Commander Vexthul watched in horror as his tactical displays filled with hostile contacts. Where moments before there had been empty space now, there were human warships appearing from every direction. His sensors officer was calling out contact reports so quickly that the words blended together. Contact bearing 27 Mark IV. Multiple human vessels emerging from asteroid field. Contact bearing 11 Mark VIII. Estimated 50 ships moving to intercept. Contact bearing 35 Mark II. Unknown class vessels closing fast. Vexthul realized that everything the Zephyrians believed about humans had been wrong. This was not a species hiding in fear. This was a military force that had used silence as a weapon to achieve total strategic surprise. The hunters had become the hunted, and they had no idea how dangerous their prey really was. Captain Nexthar aboard the Star. Crusher was experiencing similar shock as human forces revealed themselves throughout his operational area. His ship had been investigating what intelligence reports claimed was an abandoned mining system. Instead, he found himself surrounded by hidden human warships that had been waiting in perfect silence for exactly this moment. The coordination was what terrified the Zephyrian commanders most. Every human force had revealed itself at exactly the same time across dozens of light years. This suggested a level of military planning and communication technology that exceeded anything in Zephyrian experience. The aliens had always succeeded by dividing their enemies and defeating them separately. But humanity was fighting as a single unified force. On Luna, Admiral Kevin Walsh smiled as reports of successful engagements flooded into the command center. Human forces were achieving tactical surprise in every system. Zephyrian ships that had been hunting for frightened refugees were instead finding themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered by forces that had been preparing for this fight for years. Dr. Amy Carter activated the galaxy-wide communication array. After 4 months of silence, humanity was finally ready to speak. But they would not speak with words of surrender or pleas for mercy. They would speak with the roar of weapons and the thunder of engines and the collective voice of a species that had learned the most important lesson in warfare. Sometimes, the most dangerous enemy is the one that knows when to be quiet and when to strike. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon as human forces completed their devastating surprise attack across the galaxy. The silence that had lasted 4 months was finally broken, but not with words of surrender or pleas for mercy. Humanity had spoken with the thunder of weapons and the roar of engines in the coordinated voice of a species that refused to be conquered. The Zephyrian Empire that had seemed so powerful just hours before was now in complete chaos. Their fleets were scattered and broken. Their commanders were panicking as they realized they had underestimated their enemy in the worst possible way. The hunters had become the hunted, and they were discovering that humans were far more dangerous than any species they had encountered. On the Zephyrian flagship Void Render Commander, Vexthul tried desperately to coordinate a response to the human assault. But his communication networks were being jammed by technology he did not understand. His ships were being attacked by weapons that appeared to come from empty space. His tactical displays showed human forces everywhere, but his sensors had detected nothing until the moment they opened fire. The worst part for Vexthul was the realization that everything his people believed about warfare was wrong. The Zephyrians had always succeeded through intimidation and fear. They would announce their presence with overwhelming displays of force and watch as their enemies collapsed in terror. But humans had refused to be intimidated and had instead used Zephyrian psychology against them. Captain Nexthar aboard the Star Crusher was learning the same painful lesson. His ship had been surrounded by human vessels that materialized out of what he had thought was empty space. The humans had somehow hidden entire fleets in asteroid fields and gas clouds and behind planetary rings. When they revealed themselves, the Zephyrian forces found themselves outnumbered and outgunned. But the human victory was not just about superior numbers or better hiding places. It was about something much more fundamental. The humans had learned to fight as a single organism, while the Zephyrians fought as individual ships and commanders. When human forces attacked, they moved with perfect coordination across multiple star systems. Every ship knew exactly where it needed to be and what it needed to do. On Mars, Lieutenant Commander Helen Brooks watched as Zephyrian ground forces tried to retreat from the trap they had walked into. The aliens had expected to find frightened survivors hiding in abandoned buildings. Instead, they had found automated defense systems that turned every street into a killing zone. The few Zephyrians who survived were now trying to reach their landing ships, but Helen's forces controlled every route. The beauty of the human plan was that it had used Zephyrian expectations against them. The aliens had been so confident in their superiority that they had never considered the possibility that silence might mean preparation rather than fear. They had searched for weak prey and instead found predators who had been waiting patiently for the perfect moment to strike. Admiral Kevin Walsh received reports from human commanders throughout the galaxy, and each one told the same story. Zephyrian forces were being defeated wherever they were found. Ships that had been hunting for human settlements were being destroyed by hidden defense networks. Landing parties that had expected to find cowering civilians were being eliminated by automated weapons systems. But Kevin knew that the military victory was only part of what humanity had accomplished. The real achievement was proving that a relatively young species could coordinate resistance against an empire that had conquered the galaxy. The silence had not just been a tactical deception, it had been a demonstration of human unity and discipline that would inspire other species for generations. Dr. Amy Carter activated the quantum communication network to broadcast humanity's first official message since the silence began. The transmission would reach every corner of the galaxy and announce that Earth and its colonies were no longer hiding. Captain Jake Morrison was chosen to deliver the message that would echo through galactic history. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel New Horizon, speaking for all of humanity. For 4 months we have maintained silence while an alien empire searched for us across the galaxy. That silence ends today. We have shown the Zephyrian Empire and any other species that threatens innocent civilizations that humanity will not be conquered or intimidated or destroyed. The message continued, with an offer of alliance to any species that had been oppressed by the Zephyrians. Within hours, responses began arriving from dozens of worlds that had been living under alien occupation. Species that had been conquered years or decades ago were rising up against their oppressors, inspired by humanity's example. On the former Zephyrian colony world of Altair Prime, the native Kalari species had received Jake's broadcast and immediately began attacking their occupiers. The Kalari had been enslaved for 30 years, but they had never forgotten their desire for freedom. When they learned that humans had defeated Zephyrian forces, they realized that liberation was possible. Similar uprisings began on Rigel 4, where the Thanari species destroyed Zephyrian administrative centers. On Wolf 359, the Gorvani people sabotaged alien mining operations. Across the galaxy, civilizations that had been crushed by Zephyrian conquest were finding the courage to fight back. Commander Vexthul watched his empire crumble as reports of rebellion reached the Void Render from every occupied world. The Zephyrian military had been designed to crush isolated resistance movements one at a time. But they could not handle simultaneous uprisings across dozens of star systems, especially while their main fleet was being destroyed by human forces. The psychological impact of human success was spreading faster than any military advance. Species throughout the galaxy were learning that the mighty Zephyrian Empire could be defeated by patient planning and coordinated action. The silence that had seemed like weakness was revealed to be the greatest strength any species could possess on Luna. Admiral Kevin Walsh watched the tactical displays as Zephyrian forces retreated from system after system. The aliens who had seemed invincible just days before were now running from battles they could not win. Their empire built on fear and intimidation was collapsing because they had encountered an enemy that refused to be afraid. Jake Morrison concluded his broadcast with words that would be remembered as long as humans traveled among the stars. Today the galaxy learns that freedom is not something that can be taken by force or destroyed by conquest. Freedom belongs to any species brave enough to fight for it and smart enough to work together. The silence is broken, and the stars themselves will carry the sound of liberty to every world that yearns to be free. The day humanity went silent had become the day the galaxy learned to hope again. And in the quantum signals that now carried messages of alliance and friendship between species that had never known peace, the universe heard something it had not heard in centuries. It heard the sound of freedom being born in the darkness between the stars.